Usually the films I talk about on this channel are ones most people have probably at least heard of, but today I felt like talking about one that's a bit more obscure. The Ritual is a 2017 Netflix horror film and a bit of a cult classic. If you're not familiar with it, it's about a group of friends who go hiking in the Scandinavian wilderness and find themselves the prey of a monstrous Nordic deity. I had this film on my watch list for a while because its mythological influences seemed super unique for the horror genre, and I just loved the vibes of both folk horror and cosmic horror, which this film seemed to combine in a really cool way. When I finally saw the movie relatively recently, I was happy, as it's a perfectly well-made film that largely gave me what I expected from it, but I admit I was initially a little underwhelmed. Mainly, this was simply due to the fact that it left so much completely unexplained, which had the threefold effect of 1. Leaving me largely confused by the major events of the film, 2. Leaving the film's themes largely vague and nebulous, and 3. Rendering the film as a whole unable to really stand out from the many other horror films sharing its basic premise and vibes. However, after only a day or so of trying to make sense of the film's events and few explained bits of lore, I came up with a theory to explain it, one which feels so complete that I would be quite surprised if it wasn't what the writers had in mind. And since fleshing out this theory, I have come to love this movie. So that's what this video is. I'm sharing this theory to explain both the plot and the themes of this film, and suggesting what slight tweaks and additions could have made it all make a bit more sense. Yes, this is a fixer-upper video, but unlike most of my fixer-uppers, this movie doesn't need any significant changes to the story, just a few additional lines of dialogue here and there, and maybe an added sequence in the climax. Mostly, this video is just an explanation of why some time and thought helped me love this film that you've most likely slept on. But before I get into it, you should know that I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you like my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. Now without further ado, let's dive into this underappreciated folk horror classic. First, let me summarize the plot for those who haven't seen it or need their memory jogged, so of course, major spoilers ahead. The film starts by showing us the traumatic death of one of the members of this friend group, Robert, during a store robbery which was witnessed by our main protagonist, Luke. For the rest of the film, Luke's PTSD and guilt over this incident become the thematic and emotional core of the story. Jumping forward a year, the 4 remaining friends are hiking in Sweden in honor of Robert, who had wanted to go on this trip with them before he died. However, when one of the friends gets injured and they decide they need to take a shortcut through the woods to get back to the lodge more quickly, things start to get creepy. They take shelter for the night in an abandoned cabin, where they all have nightmares, and Luke, after reliving the night of the robbery, awakes outside to find strange wounds marking his chest. Over the next couple of days, they become increasingly paranoid as it becomes clear they are lost, and something is hunting them. 2 of the friends are eventually picked off, leaving Luke and Dom, the injured one, who find another cabin in which to take shelter. Unfortunately for them, this one is not so abandoned, and they find themselves the captives of a small cult who reveal that they worship the creature, showing Luke that they bear marks like his own. After the cult sacrifices Dom to the creature, the one cult member who seems to speak English explains that it is a Jotun, a descendant of Loki from Norse mythology, and that they worship it because it grants them immortality, briefly mentioning that they live without pain, though there's no elaboration on this. Ultimately, Luke manages to free himself, discovering what appear to be dozens of corpses in the attic. However, these corpses turn out to still be alive, if only barely, unable to die but still aging after who knows how long they've been up there. Luke burns the bodies and sets the whole cabin ablaze, incurring the Jotun's wrath, as it seemingly kills the remaining cult members in anger before spotting Luke. At this point, it chases him for a bit before catching him, and it tries to force him to bow down and worship it, though Luke keeps getting back up in stubborn refusal until it seems to get fed up and ready to kill him. Fortunately, he grabbed an axe earlier, which he uses to wound the creature. It probably doesn't cause any serious injury, but it gives him the chance to run to the edge of the woods, which were conveniently nearby. At this point, most video essayists recapping the plot say the Jotun just lets him go because he stood up to it, but it pretty clearly chases him all the way to the tree line, only stopping because it apparently can't leave the forest. Luke screams at the creature in defiance, and then walks back to civilization. And that's the end of the movie. So if you have a lot of questions at this point, it's not because I failed to explain anything, since that's literally all the information given in the movie. In terms of why the creature does what it does and how it works, all we know is that it can get into people's heads and make them hallucinate as Luke keeps reliving the robbery and Dom sees his wife Gale before the Jotun kills him. For some reason, it marks some people and not others, and I guess it gives the people it marks the chance to worship it, and if they do, they live forever, though it's not a pleasant sort of immortality. In terms of the themes, I guess the Jotun probably somehow represents Luke's trauma, and in standing up to it at the end, I guess he's choosing not to let that trauma define and consume him, which is resonant, don't get me wrong, but it feels like it's not saying nearly as much as it could, and it leaves so much unanswered and unexplored. Why does it kill some people and not others? Why does it grant those it chooses immortality, and what is the thematic significance of that? If the Jotun offers a painless eternal existence, what is it that Luke is really rejecting in the end by refusing to worship it, and what does that have to do with his guilt and trauma? It also feels like the ending didn't make nearly as much use as it could have out of the creature's psychic abilities to create a more memorable climax and truly cathartic ending, rather than just a brief chase and physical confrontation. So now, I'm going to explain my theory for what is really going on in the ritual, and describe how it could have been explained, as well as suggest what could have been added to the ending to truly bring the film's themes full circle. So I imagine the Jotun feeds on people's emotion, particularly their pain. With most people, it just stalks and kills them for a quick snack on their fear and physical pain as they die, much like Pennywise in It. However, when it senses particularly strong emotional turmoil and unresolved trauma in people, it keeps them alive to feed on them indefinitely. In doing so, it strips them, not just of their pain, but of their desires and even their memories, leaving them as hollow shells of their former selves, long before they become living corpses in an attic. Choosing these people means marking them with the wounds in the chest, but the individual must then still allow it to take their pain by worshipping it. If the individual does not do so, it will generally just kill them. When the group of friends stay the night in the cabin, they all have nightmares because the Jotun is going through each of their memories, looking for emotional trauma worth feeding on. It only finds it in Luke, and thus it leads him outside to mark him, while leaving the rest to be snacked on. I also imagine the community in the woods is composed largely of people from the outside world, who, like Luke, were chosen by the Jotun to be spared, and have essentially lost their memories of their former lives and their individual identity in their blissful existence, as the Jotun feeds on their emotional pain. The Jotun is so pissed about the cabin being burned because all those zombified cult members in the attic were its main food source, still alive in only the most technical sense, so it can perpetually leech off of their pain. Now, with all of that explained, let me share my tweaks to support this theory. For the most part, I would simply have added a bit more dialogue between Luke and the one English-speaking cult member. The first time Luke and Dom interact with the cult after being tied up, at the point when the witch sees Luke's mark and shows him her own, and he asks why it chose him, rather than ignoring him, the young woman gives a cryptic answer along the lines that he should know the answer to that question better than them. Later, in his conversation with her after Dom's sacrifice, in which she explains that the creature is a Jotun who keeps them all alive, Luke asks her more about the community and about herself, and she reveals that she, like just about everyone else there, was not born in the woods, but she doesn't remember where she comes from, or why the Jotun chose her, because it's taken those memories from her, leaving her with nothing but peace, and she promises the same for him. Finally, at the point where she tells him that it gives them immortality, rather than merely mentioning in passing that they live without pain, she places great emphasis on this point, saying that it takes their pain, their desire, their grief, and their guilt. This last point in particular clearly resonates with Luke. Perhaps even asks about Dom, and she says that he had more to give the Jotun in death than in life, though maybe that's spelling it out a bit more than necessary. Additionally, on a much less important note, just to differentiate this film from every other movie in which people lost in the woods stumble upon a creepy cabin, I would have made the first couple abandoned cabins look like super old Viking longhouses, while the last cabin where the cult lives would look more like a medieval Scandinavian church, and it would be the center of a tiny little village with a garden and livestock, making this feel more like a real lived-in community, and one whose aesthetics fit its setting. Anyway, back to the actual point of the video. Now let's turn to the film's ending. With everything I've explained, it should be more clear that Luke's rejection of the Jotun's blissful immortality is essentially his refusal to continue suppressing and running from his guilt as he has been, choosing not to succumb to a numb existence of denial and dissociation. He is embracing his guilt and trauma, thus accepting himself and his past, and making the first crucial steps toward resolving his trauma and moving on. But as I've mentioned, this ending could have been a lot more interesting, so let's make some more tweaks. Just as the Jotun appears to Dawn as his wife Gale, I would have it appear to Luke in the form of Robert to taunt him and try to get him to surrender to it. Luke initially tries to run from the apparition of his friend, but then he also sees Dom, then Phil, and finally Hutch, all like Robert, still with fresh mortal wounds. Each of these apparitions tells him he could have saved them, and he tries running from each until they surround him. Then, as Robert, the creature tells him that they will always be with him, that they'll never stop haunting him and tormenting him in his sleep. It asks him why he keeps running, keeps fighting, and pleads with him to surrender. It tells him that he doesn't have to live with this pain, that he can be free of it if he just lets them take it. Then, in response, Luke tells the apparition, "I'm done running," which initially sounds like defeat until he continues, "'Cause you aren't real, and you can't hurt me anymore," before swinging his axe at it. The Jotun then reverts to its true form and catches the axe, and this is where it tries in vain to physically force him to bow to it. Finally, as he stands up to it in defiance the third and final time, I would have him yell, "You can't have my pain." This rejection could be interpreted as a parallel for the rejection of addictions or other behaviors that will consume one's life in their desperation to numb their pain rather than deal with it. With just this bit of headcanon and added dialogue, I find this movie's message to be a beautiful statement about dealing with grief and guilt. I hope you can see that I didn't really change the story at all. I just slightly expanded on it, but I feel that in doing so, I revealed the filmmaker's implicit intentions and made a disappointingly forgettable film into a profound horror classic. But what do you think? Does my theory make sense, and do you think my explanation and changes improved the story as much as I think they did? If not, why? Was everything I tried to reveal already obvious to you, or do my edits just not make it any better for you? I want to hear your perspective, so please join me in the conversation down in the comments. As always, I'm just here to kick off the discussion, so until next time, just keep thinking out loud.